What would you do if your younger brother burst into your room when you were having an intimate moment, ruining your plans? What I did will be revealed to you now. Hi there. I am Sienna. I returned home for autumn break a few weeks ago, and all of this happened while I was 22 years old. Just so you know, I had been studying on another continent for nearly 2 years, so I hadn't gone home in over a year. However, the stars aligned, and I bought a trip home. Coming home after a long absence was an overpowering sensation. I was very emotional when I was with my folks. Afterwards, Ryder appeared. Ryder is the younger sibling of mine. We were constantly in each other's company because we grew up together. Back then, he was a little awkward and lanky and a little younger than me. In our younger years, he followed me about like a shadow. I hardly knew him when he stepped in now. From the skinny, timid boy I knew as a child, he has matured into a tall, confident man with broad shoulders and a height of 6 feet. Wearing a form-fitting black shirt, he looked like he stepped out of an Instagram glow-up picture. I felt a tense muscle in his back as I embraced him. We were in a dream. You matured? Incredulous, I retreated and uttered my words. He merely chuckled while rubbing the nape of his neck. I know, it's common. He was more than meets the eye. His aroma was wonderful. I was taken aback, though I can't say for sure if it was his scent or something else entirely. Throughout the remainder of the night, I found myself frequently crossing my arms and observing details that had previously escaped my notice. A deeper laugh escaped him. There was a serene vitality in his gaze. Even though I'd known him my entire life, it seemed strange to meet someone new. My friend, I'll cut to the chase. The first night back, I was absolutely exhausted after all the catching up, embracing, and devouring of my mom's world-renowned lasagna. Everything I had was sapped from my energy tank by the 18 hours of travel with layovers and delays. So, after we all said our goodbyes, I headed upstairs to take a shower and then collapsed into my old bedroom. Allow me to explain. When I departed, my former room remained essentially undisturbed. Even though my parents converted part of it into a guest room, they nevertheless left behind all my high school belongings, a bookshelf full of young adult novels, and my posters. Entering that place was like entering a time capsule. The wave of nostalgia washed over me, but the truth was that I just wanted to collapse into bed and sleep. To alleviate the aches and pains from the flight, I took a hot shower. It was the most amazing feeling, like I had finally found some serenity after weeks of turmoil. After finishing, I dove under my room's blankets, slammed the lights out, and wore an oversized t-shirt. It was peaceful, comfortable, and chilly. Just as in your childhood home, there's peace and quiet there. I can't say for sure if it was the jet lag, the alleviation of scholastic stress, or the appearance of Ryder's return to my life. It seemed that way at first, but as I laid there in the dark, my thoughts began to wander, and I realized that it had been an extremely long time since I'd had any form of closeness. There was no way I could have found the time or energy to form such a meaningful connection with someone amidst all of my studies and life in general. Consequently, I decided to give myself a break. It seemed like the ideal time to unwind. I was alone, the home was quiet, and everything was in its right place. To begin, I closed my eyes and allowed my hands to gently glide over my skin. It was as if I were reuniting with myself. The feeling was gentle and soothing. I felt a growing warmth as my fingers lightly touched my lips and then my neck. The problem is that my thoughts suddenly turned to Ryder, as if he had slipped my mind. It was completely unplanned, yet there he was, with his strong jawline, slightly disheveled hair, and quiet confidence. Suddenly, I felt a surge of heat in my chest and then down my body, like a wildfire. I attempted to dismiss the idea, rationalizing that it was likely my imagination playing tricks on me due to the long time since we last saw each other, but the idea persisted anyway, and my efforts to ignore it only served to amplify its grip. He seemed so different today, and I couldn't stop picturing the edge to his deep chuckle and how he changed my life. I stopped fighting the thought as I imagined his solidity beneath my palms and the way he had hugged me earlier. So I took it in. As the heat intensified, I dipped my fingers deeper and allowed myself to be enveloped by it. As I absorbed more of the experience, I noticed a change in my breathing pattern, shallow and rapid. The room grew even more silent, as if the entire world had vanished save for me, my rising emotions, and he reappeared in my thoughts. Ryder, I refrained from intervening this time. As I fantasized about his name being whispered to me, I could feel his sure and powerful hands caressing my flesh. The feeling was so real, as if he were really present, that I gave in to the illusion. The instant my fingers moved and my torso arched, my body responded. I could feel the electricity. The warmth I had earlier became an overwhelming sensation, and every nerve in my body was tingling with life. Not only was it physically intense, but emotionally intense as well. It was the ideal combination of familiarity and novelty, as if I were experiencing something completely new. It could have been the fact that Ryder had played such a significant role in my life as a child, or it could have been the shock of reuniting with him after all these years and seeing such a transformed version of him. It felt strong, whatever it was. I gave up to the moment, letting go of all control. My breathing became heavier, and my hands began to move with greater assurance. My mental picture of Ryder with his hands on my waist and his lips touching my ear got more vivid. Of course, it was illegal. It was already intense, but the fact that it was Ryder, the child I had babysat when I was 14, just added fuel to the fire. It was completely out of character, yet I couldn't help but give in. His crinkled eyes and the sound of his laugh lingered in my mind. His smile brought it all flooding back, but with a fresh layer of attraction that I was ill-prepared to handle. Only the soft light from the street lamp outside my window illuminated the dimly lit room. I let my thoughts to drift deeper into the dense, heated air. Thoughts of him made my heart skip a beat, and every touch sent shivers down my spine. But just when I thought I was losing myself in the experience, a voice within me hesitated. A little voice murmured, "What are you doing?" in my subconscious. It was like a cold shower. I opened my eyes wide, stared at the ceiling, and tried to make sense of my emotions. Then, just as swiftly, my hesitancy passed. This is Ryder. No harm, no FA, I reminded myself. It was only a fantasy, a way to relax at the end of a long day. I relinquished control and allowed myself to be enveloped once more in the comforting electric haze by closing my eyes. Suddenly, my finger movements were deliberate, and I allowed my imagination run wild. All I could hear this time was my own breath and the gentle caress of the covers. There was no uncertainty whatsoever. All around me, with a clear mental picture of Ryder, I imagined how his hands would feel large and warm with that roughness that comes with regular exercise. I envisioned his menacing gaze and his low, playful voice as he called my name in a manner that would make me tremble. His gaze lingered in my thoughts, man. His demeanor was both reserved and playful. It was as if he was harboring a secret that he chose not to divulge. The sensation of being on the brink of something forbidden, as if I were crossing an invisible border, intensified the experience. I felt completely at one with the present. My heart was racing, I was on the verge of passing out, and then it just happened. There was no knock, no prior notice, and then the door slammed shut against the wall, allowing unimpeded access to my chamber. Sienna Ryder's voice smacked the air with its sharpness. I completely stopped moving. Ryder, oh my gosh, was standing there while my whole body stiffened up and my brain short-circuited. I lay there like a deer in headlights. Upon realizing what he had walked into, the ear-piercing silence sent shockwaves through his body. The instant his consciousness registered what was happening was crystal clear to me. His expression changed to one of intense redness, and he remained motionless as he stood there dumbfounded. Attempting to avert his gaze was futile. I lay there like a complete moron, exposed not just physically but also emotionally, which felt much worse. He merely stared, his jaw slightly agape as if his whole system had collapsed. My body and voice were paralyzed. My mind just wouldn't accept the reality of the situation. After what seemed like an endless wait, my mental cogs began to move once more. Hey, Ryder, what's going on? I raised my voice to a level that was far higher than I had planned. Rapid blinking helped him snap out of it. Your habit of leaving the door unlocked was news to me. Seizing a cushion to shield himself, he sat up and fired back. Despite my best efforts to remain undressed, my heart was racing, and not for the good reason. I wanted to hurl something at Ryder since his face was still a dark shade of crimson, but then he smiled with a little smirk hidden at the corner of his mouth. As he retreated from the room, his hands up in a surrendered gesture, he casually mentioned that it could be a good idea to post a sign. To my surprise, the little dweeb laughed as if he hadn't just witnessed the most humiliating incident of my life. I could hear him jogging down the stairs, still chuckling as he shut the door behind him. I was dumbfounded and sat there transfixed. My face was red hot, my heart was racing, and I wanted to hide in a hole forever, but here's where I was astonished, even by myself. His expression that moment he froze, eyes wide, and mouth open was all I could think of as I sat there reliving what had happened. I couldn't help but feel an unexpected impact. As much as I hated to confess it, the recollection stuck with me, and instead of feeling embarrassed, I felt this strange arousal, as if he saw me not only physically but also in this exposed, unfiltered moment. I was still embarrassed, to be sure, but I couldn't get rid of the electric rush that came with it. His face went from shocked to amused as he stood in the doorway. That image kept replaying in my head. It seemed like our animosity had reached a breaking point, and there was no turning back now. I attempted to distract myself by shaking it off, but it didn't work. I couldn't shake the mental picture of him standing there. In fact, it was like lighting a fuse every time I pondered it. Attempting to collect myself and make sense of my emotions, I paced aimlessly around my room for the next few hours. However, the more I pondered the matter, the clearer it became that something had evolved. This had progressed beyond a simple matter of attraction. The focus was on him. I hadn't seen my childhood friend Ryder in years. He was the one who would upset me to no end. I was unable to continue denying it. Not in a nebulous, idealistic sense. I really desired him. That was my guy. I spent the entire following day preoccupied with the events of the previous day. The shame wasn't the only thing on my mind anymore. It didn't matter how I dealt with it. I was enthralled. Ryder, in contrast, pretended the incident had not occurred. In the middle of breakfast, he cracked jokes and fiddled with his phone while my mom discussed a recipe she wanted to try. He was completely typical. To all appearances, he was unfazed by the situation. Sitting there, on the verge of exploding, I could hardly bring myself to look someone in the eyes. It was difficult to ignore him in such a cramped house, so I spent the majority of the day doing just that. I did some washing with my mom, caught up on email, and attempted to read a book I had been trying to get to the end of as a distraction. Still, he remained a constant in my thoughts, regardless of my actions. I was summoned to the living room by my dad towards the end of the afternoon. He and my mom sat on the couch, as if they were going to announce that we're going out tonight. Your grandparents, according to my dad, might use some assistance, so we're taking a road trip over there. We plan to remain till early morning, but we may stay late if necessary. Shall we have a full celebration tomorrow to mark your return? Very well. Despite my heart beating, I nodded in an attempt to appear normal. Across the room, Ryder perused a magazine while seated on the floor. Following us, Ryder, you're responsible for everything while we're away. My dad shouted at him. Sure, I won't let you torch the house. I will try my best, Ryder said with a smile as he glanced up at the sky. After my mom let out a giggle, they began to gather their belongings to go. The home was silent once more after 10 minutes. Ryder and I were the only ones. I attempted to maintain my composure at first. I pretended not to hear him at all costs while I remained in my room, fiddling with my phone. I could sense his activity as he made his way downstairs, the sound of dishes being washed as he reached for something, and finally, the low buzz of the television as he settled in to watch a program. The more I remained there, though, the more fidgety I became. I wanted more. Yesterday night's events were still resonating in my head, and my body was practically twitching from the stress. It was as if a switch had been flipped inside of me. I failed to consider the potential consequences or the wisdom of the proposal when I was in the moment. I refused to give in to second thoughts this time around. All I could think about was how much I wanted him. I waited until nightfall, when the house was silent save for the tiniest hum of the downstairs TV, and then, when I finally snapped, I took action. Making my way stealthily down the hall to Ryder's room, I slipped out of my door. As I peered through the slightly open door, I beheld him sound asleep on his bed. He lay on his side with his back to the entrance and a buried arm beneath his pillow. I paused for an instant. I was afraid my racing heart could rouse him from his slumber, but the longer I remained standing, the greater the surge of bravery, or perhaps recklessness, that overwhelmed me. Quietly, I made my way inside and shut the door behind me. The room was just slightly illuminated by the light from his desk lamp. A steady, slow breath was audible, and it caused a pause in my own breathing. My nerves were nearly pulsating, but I insisted on climbing onto the bed and lying down beside him nonetheless. I laid down on my side, facing away from him, mimicking his stance so that I could feel the heat emanating from him. I lay there for a while, allowing the tension to grow. The silence, the stillness, it was entrancing. Though I was mentally racing, my body had its desires well defined. I took a little step forward, drawing nearer to him. When our palms met, he shifted slightly in his sleep, but remained sound asleep. Even though my breath was labored, I persisted. Just as I was about to speak, he rolled over. His eyes blinked slowly as he attempted to process what had happened, and he saw me. His expression shifted from drowsy bewilderment to outright astonishment. "Hey, Sienna, what's up?" The lack of sleep had left his voice scratchy and gravelly. At first, I remained silent as I extended my hand to grasp his and held it close to my waist. He seemed stunned, frozen in place, staring at me as if he couldn't believe what was happening, his hand feeling strong and warm. I whispered, "It's your fault because you came into my room without knocking." His face betrayed a combination of perplexion and another emotion that eluded me as he gazed at me. However, he soon began to calm down. I witnessed his surrender as his hand slid across my side without his conscious intervention. For an instant, the world seemed out of this world as Ryder's tentative hand lingered over me. His touch carried an air of uncertainty, the kind of uneasy energy one feels when venturing into unexplored terrain, and I could sense it too. He leaned down softly, his fingers quivering slightly. I had no idea he was even planning to do it at first. He stared at me with an expression that was equal parts perplexed, terrified, and inquisitive. I could almost maintain my composure, but then something changed. I could see his thoughts racing, likely trying to decide whether to run away, laugh it off, or lean into whatever it was. A subtle nod from me conveyed my approval, my desire for this, and my message that he shouldn't give it too much thought. He appeared to have been sufficiently reassured by that small word. Initially, he seemed to be testing the waters as his hand moved with caution. Warm and solid, yet still tentative, his fingers brushed over my side. There was both doubt and resolve visible on his face. It was already intense, but the fact that he was determined to complete it despite his lack of knowledge further added to it. I trembled when his palm touched mine, and I clenched my jaw. Beyond the tangible experience, what made it special was his obvious attempt to gauge my emotional state and respond accordingly. There was an element of vulnerability and rawness to it. I felt his breath as I maintained my hand on his chest. I felt the gentle grain of muscle under his warm skin as it brushed across my palm. Even in the low light, I could make out the delicate veins that ran along his arms and his big, substantial chest. The more immersed Ryder became, the less anxious he became. He started to move with more assurance and purpose. He had progressed beyond mere clumsiness. Truthfully, he was performing an excellent job of paying attention, observing my reactions, and modifying appropriately. Even though I was nervous and excited, I couldn't help but crack a small smile. His enthusiastic attitude made him seem like he was not just finding something new, but also devoting his heart to it, which was charming. It had its flaws. Although there were a few instances where his lack of expertise was apparent, such as when he hesitated or fumbled slightly, his obvious dedication to ensuring a positive experience for both of us more than made up for it. It was truly overwhelming, but in the greatest possible way. It seemed as if my whole body was in touch with him. Every feeling seemed magnified. I could feel an electric current flowing between us, and the air seemed thicker and hotter than usual. As time went on, Ryder's self-assurance increased. It was far more intense than anything I had experienced recently. His motions grew smoother and more certain. I noticed a shift in his demeanor. He began to let go of his fears and embrace something more courageous, while I became engrossed in the sensation of everything else vanishing. Everything that had been uncomfortable, hesitant, or frightening about what this could imply vanished. Everything was going swimmingly, him, our growing bond, our complete immersion in the present moment, until that sudden surge of overwhelming sensation left me gasping for air. Perhaps because it was both physically and emotionally taxing, it was 5 times more powerful than anything I had ever felt before. It was his expression, his obvious effort, and the fact that we were both venturing into uncharted territory together that got to me. Your proficiency at this beyond my expectations, and I couldn't help but chuckle nervously as our foreheads touched. My tone was just above a whisper as I teased gently. A smile spread across his face as a wave of pride and relaxation washed over him. This is so much worse than I anticipated. Even his voice was silent, he confessed. The tense atmosphere between us melted away as we both laughed, and I realized then that this wasn't about the events, it was about him. Leaning in, it was as if by instinct. It was a slow, understated move, not a big, dramatic one. I hoped he would back off if he felt the need, but he didn't. The moment his gaze landed on my lips, I felt a surge of confidence. As if to gauge the waters, our lips gently touched at first. His were warm and unexpectedly gentle, and there was a hint of hesitation in his kiss, as if he was still not convinced this was happening. There was some initial hesitation, but that quickly faded as the seconds passed. He cocked his head ever so slightly, planting a kiss with a little more assurance, and I felt that old surge of desire. Everything about Ryder at that time was making me go absolutely bonkers. Maybe it was the forbidden and unexpected nature of the situation, but I just couldn't get enough of him. The fact that he was obviously learning as he went along and kissing me made it all the more real and authentic, yet I could still feel his lack of experience. I resolved to assume command. To get him to lie flat on the couch, I pushed him back and guided him gently. Although he briefly widened his eyes, he ultimately gave in. Straddling his waist, I climbed on top of him, and I couldn't help but smile at his expression, part terrified, half amazed, as he stared up at me as if he couldn't believe this was actually happening. "Relax," I whispered as I ran my fingers over his chest. He could barely make out his abs and a sliver of toned skin since his shirt had risen up just a little. In order to feel the tightening of his muscles, I ran my fingers along that line. I interrupted him with a deeper, more passionate kiss before he could finish speaking. As he eased down beneath me, his hands hesitantly came to rest on my hips. The kiss intensified, becoming more intense and hungry. He trembled under my weight as my fingers entangled in his hair and tugged ever so slightly. As his grip on my hips increased, I momentarily feared that he could finally seize control, but he refrained. I loved it when he gazed up at me, totally absorbed in the moment, and allowed me take the lead. Being in charge, directing him through this experience, and seeing his reactions was incredibly empowering. His breath caught as I moved, my weight shifted, or my fingers traced along his skin. It was enthralling to know that I had an effect on him, and it seemed to boost his confidence, as his hands began to move more freely and explore more. It was remarkable for me to observe the transformation in him as he began to relax and savor the experience. It felt like every tiny movement, kiss, and touch was intensified. I felt like I was on fire for some reason. Maybe it was the adrenaline, the forbidden aspect of it, or simply his presence. The intensity and urgency of our kisses intensified. I could see his pulse pounding in my chest as we became engrossed in one another. I ran my fingers up his arms, sensing their power and the way his muscles tensed up as I touched them. Even though this complete nerd didn't have any protection, I still wanted him badly enough to do what I wanted, which was to slide down his feet, get down on my knees, and do what I wanted. Here is an updated version that captures the closeness of the events while keeping a respectful and safe tone. As I shifted in my seat, it was like a dance, but with us both learning something new. His physical reaction was so new, it was as if he were feeling this type of connection for the very first time. The way he moved revealed a combination of interest and reluctance, together with an apparent weakness. Not because I was in a hurry, but because I cared about his comfort, I stooped and kneeled next to him. As our trust in one another grew, the entire scene seemed to play out in slow motion. We only knew that we were investigating this very moment. No expectations whatsoever. His reaction appeared sincere, a bit anxious, but also genuinely into the experience, as they were both physically and emotionally feeling each other out. I understood and appreciated that this was a novel experience for him. I refrained from pressuring him and instead let the situation develop organically, without any interference from either of us. The physical aspect is but a fraction of what is happening at these moments. What struck me most was the way we conveyed meaning via our deeds, consistently upholding limits and fostering mutual understanding. I got to my feet, little disoriented, and turned to Ryder as soon as it was ended. Asking if you're a virgin was my first thought. His gaze remained fixed. He looked directly into my eyes and whispered the word no. His voice was firm, but there was an air of anticipation in his delivery that caused me to halt. He eventually said, "Okay, you got me, sis," after I maintained eye contact with him. Being preoccupied with my own thoughts, I failed to fully comprehend his meaning at first. Upon exiting the room, a sudden realization of what had transpired began to sink in, as if everything had come crashing down. Confusion, guilt, and perhaps even humiliation were among the many emotions that swirled about me. It was all happening at once, and it was electric and full of life. Even with the most amazing men I'd ever been with, it seemed so genuine. The idea that I should have known better, that I had crossed a boundary I shouldn't have, kept running through my mind, but I couldn't stop thinking about the feelings I had at the time. It differed from everything else. That element, too, the sensation that something was absolutely correct at that very second, was impossible for me to disregard. I couldn't deny how fantastic that was, even though I felt awful in the aftermath for what I did to Ryder. Does that sound good? Is it correct? To be honest, I am confused. Frankly, I'm still confused. What are your thoughts? Will guilt be an issue? Leave a comment telling me what you think.